Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 379 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Leah and Channing Smithson, who are artists and podcasters based in the LA area. I got to know them on Instagram and started listening to their show, Vessel Art as a Doorway, which focuses on the intersection of creativity and the brain. On their show, you'll hear discussions about how the arts can be used to repair neural pathways, heal communities, and create empathy. If you'd like to hear an example of the show, you can do that by listening on any podcast app or by going to their website, that's clss.studio. You can also follow them on Instagram under Leahs Smithson Art, or you can follow Channing under Just Glaze Channing. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that donated to our recent spring fund drive. We are listener supported, so I'd like to thank Susanna Lasanti as well as Katrina Chater for their contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself and help support the show, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Also wanted to do today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of a GoFundMe campaign for Kent McLaughlin. He and his wife, Susie Lindsay, have been staples of the Western North Carolina pottery scene for many decades, and Kent has recently been struggling with cancer. He is undergoing chemotherapy, but they both are not able to work in the studio. They need your help paying the bills over the next couple months, so there is a fundraiser for them on GoFundMe.com. The easiest way to find that is to search his name, Kent McLaughlin. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So to start, I'm going to start with you, Leah. I was reading an article about your work, and you were telling a backstory about how you've had art in your life, but what really pushed you towards art was a situation with your father where you were kind of seeing the way he was dealing with a stroke and with the injury associated with that. So can you tell that story and talk about that, how that really pushed you into a life of art making?
My father had a massive stroke, and what that did was it was on the left side of his brain. So even though he had all of his intelligence, it took away his words. So he wasn't able to speak. He's still not really able to speak to us. And so one of the therapies, he had a few different therapists, few different speech therapists. And the one that was the most effective was one that used music, because music actually, when we listen to music, it kind of activates the creative side of our mind, which generally is like the right side of our brain. And so when we sing songs, especially when we sing common songs like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, it activates, because it's on the right side of our brain, it activates those words and can help to rewire the synapses that we lose on the left side of the brain. So after even just the first few minutes of the one session that he had with this therapist, he was already regaining some of his speech. And it had been months, since maybe even over a year actually, before that he could not speak. And so when that happened, it made me dive into a rabbit hole of learning more about creativity in our brain and how effective that side of our brain is. And I think it's something that we can tend to take for granted. And it made me really appreciate that side of us. And it wanted me to, it encouraged me rather, it motivated me and inspired me to really not help others with it, but really, yeah, I guess kind of help others with it, do more art, and see if I can bring that into my own practice to help stimulate with other people.
Yeah, and I had read, I think on your website, where you talked about how making and buying art is an act of self-care, that this is all like a larger process of kind of reflecting on yourself through either buying or making art. So can you talk more about that as a maker?
Yeah, I feel like whether we realize it or not, we are affected by our aesthetics, like what we see. And the thing is that when we have art and when we collect art, it's meaningful to us. And it can connect us like to maybe memories. It can connect us to things about ourselves and to moments in time that we have. And when we do that, just thinking about like some of the things that I've read, how just having those things in our house and we look at them and even if we briefly think about something, it can create the same type of endorphins in us that we get when we exercise. And so those types of things are really beneficial to us. And so sometimes, even though we take it for granted, those things are really important to us. And we can see that even looking through history and time, like even though people needed, maybe thousands of years ago, even though they needed a pot to cook in so that they could eat, they still they put in the effort to make it aesthetically pleasing. And a lot of times when we make those decisions, is connected to things that are meaningful to us, or maybe a message that we want to give to somebody else. So that's kind of how I feel that collecting and looking at art, and in addition to making it, is an act of self-care.
Well, Channing, I want to bring you into the conversation and talk about you are a maker, but you also have a career in the medical profession. So can you describe first what your job is?
Yeah, I guess I call myself, well, I'm a radiology technologist, but basically we're special procedures technologists. In the operating room, you have X-ray techs that actually scrub in on procedures with the doctor, and we help monitor the patient's EKG. And also we assist the doctor during the surgery. So, he has a, knife, scalpel, things like that. So majority of the time, especially like with this past year, during the pandemic, you see a lot of healthcare workers, we would come in for strokes, also heart attacks and things like that. And we thread the wires into the patient's body, and we manipulate the catheters and use balloons and stents to actually open up passageways in the heart, in the brain, and things like that. So, yeah, I've been I've been in this field for almost, goodness, was it like 23, 24 years now? I can't believe it, how time flies. I came in when I was a baby, by the way. So yeah, just been doing it for years, man. I enjoy it. This past year has been kind of crazy. I haven't really been able to give my patients, the bedside manner that I like, coming in with moon suits and things like that. But yeah, it's been pretty cool, man. But really, when it came to art, one of the things is when I was working at Stanford, I was working with a lot of neuro interventional radiologists, and we would do procedures, let's say with a patient who was experiencing maybe like an aneurysm or some type of clot in their brain. The doctors, they would get access to a vessel inside of their brain and inject dye, so we could actually see how the vessels in the brain, I guess, show up on the X-ray camera, and then we would invite another doctor to come in, and actually that doctor would show the patient a series of pictures or images. And based on that, we could see how his brain was actually functioning. So that really kind of got me excited. When I first saw it, I was working at a hospital in the Bay Area, and I could see like specifically how the medical field and also art, how it's affected. We're affected by the things that we see. And that's one of the things that's always excited me about art.
How did you get into clay?
This one right here, man. I had no desire to ever be a potter or a ceramist, but Leah kept pushing me and she was like, why don't you just take a class? And for years, I would always help her out. She has a jewelry line. I would help her out with her jewelry, with making it. And, we would have it in, magazines and stuff like Atlanta Magazine and things like that. So she would show me some of the basics of how to actually create something. But I never thought I could actually be an artist, in my life. But she just kept pushing me. And right across the street from us in downtown Los Angeles is the Row. And in there's a studio, Still Life Ceramics. And we're really good friends with the owners of that business, Anna and Mel. And Anna, she was always friendly. She would have Leah come in and actually teach classes, and yeah, I just fell down a rabbit hole, man. And before you know it, I just start getting at the will. The first thing was the will, trying to master that will and not let that clay like fly off and hit somebody in the head, right? So yeah, once I got into like will throwing, that was cool. And then I was like, oh man, I could build on the will, so I could get into the hand building part. And that was fun too. I see some of your stuff, Ben. It's awesome, man. I love like the handles and stuff like that. So yeah, just building on that and then doing more sculptural work with something. And within the past year, it's been kind of crazy because a couple of stores have actually asked to carry some of the work now. So that's pretty exciting. So I guess we're getting into getting into more work where some of the work is actually moving from off my shelf. So that's pretty cool.
That's always a good thing. With your medical life, it's procedural, I would imagine. Like there is a right way to do every single process you're doing on the patient. But in clay, like you can choose to do anything. Like you can do things out of order. You can throw first, hand build, then try to throw what you hand build again. Like there's an improvisation to art making that I don't think you're probably allowed to do in the medical field. So can you talk about learning how to improvise or learning how to follow your own intuition when it comes to working in clay? And actually for both of you guys, you could answer that question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Some of the same principles when it comes to clay in the medical procedures I do actually fall hand in hand, because if you don't thread the wire in a certain way in a certain matter of time, the patient dies.
Wow.
That's right. So when it comes to actual clay work, you have to use a certain amount of precision, I feel, doing clay as well. It's so funny that you said that. There's a cardiologist that I've been working with recently, and she's actually a potter as well. And I had the opportunity. We got scrubbed in because we're always talking about art during the procedures. And I asked her, well, do you feel like you're a better doctor because you're an artist? And she said, yeah, because I have to pay attention to the finer details of the work. And actually, there's a method into the work, and you have to be precise with maybe your movements, in medical procedures, and I feel like in the pottery, because if you just get all handsy-dancy, right? The pot goes everywhere, and then you can lose it. And then you also have a certain amount of time to actually do certain things with the pot, at different temperatures as well. So the same thing with the medical procedures. If you don't get access to that body or that vessel in enough time, within 30 minutes, the patient dies or the patient suffers. So I kind of feel like the same aesthetics is what, the clay process also.
I can't speak on his medical at all. But it was funny that you mentioned that too, because there was a brief period of time where actually it was right before my father had that stroke, and I decided to just go all in with my art practice, where I was learning to be a court reporter, which is the exact opposite of what you do when you're trying to be creative. Because when you're in court and you're taking down a record, you have to take down exactly what they say. You have to look at their movements, if they're shaking their head up and down for yes and no and all those types of things. So it was the complete opposite of, art and being creative. But I agree with Channing. It's funny because it's like when you move, I guess there's parallels, but of course, with anything, I feel like with me, I use a lot of different mediums. And when I move from one medium to another, the medium kind of changes a little bit the way I do the work. And so that's also kind of exciting. But yeah, that's one nice thing I think about art. You do have freedom of creativity, but there are certain principles that when you apply it, it can make the work better. Or if you are going to rebel, it's almost better if it's intentional, like I understand this principle. Now I'm going to rebel against it. And then that can make stronger work versus, you just don't understand or just kind of doing whatever.
Yeah, well, I think about it with music, like one of my friends is a jazz guitarist and he knows the structure of music so well, and that's why he can improvise. It's kind of like with us with formalism and knowing how colors work together, form works together. It's nice to know that stuff. So then you can say, I don't agree with what I was taught, or I don't want to do what I did last week when I made that painting. But, I have a question just about human empathy. In being a court reporter and being in the medical field, like you're called to have a lot of empathy, especially you mentioned like in the bedside manner, like you're talking to people in the hospital when they're sick. Like no one comes to you to have a party. You know what I mean? Like there is an issue that you're helping them address. So how do you think that job draws on your resources of empathy? And is that hard to replenish that? Like, do you feel like you get burnt out a lot or easily from helping people?
No, man. No, I never get burnt out. My heart always goes out to my patients. As long as I started radiology back in like 97, and I still look at my patients. Even my heart even goes even more out to them, I think, especially since I've actually been a patient on the gurney, and I had to have surgery before. So after that experience, it made me even more empathetic towards my patients. And yeah, when I think about the pots and the ceramics, the bowls, the cups, the vases, things like that I make for people, I'm specifically thinking about a certain environment, and I'm thinking about a certain aesthetic that I want them to have in their home, and a certain feeling that I want them to have. Like for instance, there was a coworker, he asked me to make something for his girlfriend. So, when I made that pot and, and glazing the pot, whatever, I was thinking about how she would feel when she opened up the package, So yeah, my heart, nah, man, when it comes to, patients and stuff like that, I feel like, especially once you get that opportunity to be on the gurney and come on over to the operating table, your empathy really goes out to people. And I hope you don't mind me saying this past year has been crazy for healthcare workers, because it's been an environment where we've had to watch people from afar, suffer medically. And that is really difficult because, the actual process of touching someone, not being able to touch someone, has really worked on a lot of healthcare workers, I think, psychologically. We're seeing nurses, they're like looking at their patients from outside of the room, and they're afraid to actually walk into the room because of the virus. So yeah, it's been a tough year to say the least.
Well, it's cool you brought up touch, because I think of that a lot. Like when I have nieces and nephews, and when they're upset, like hugging a child is hugging an adult is a very easy way to get someone to calm down. But if you're trying to care for someone medically and explain what they need to have done, and you can't touch them, you can't reassure them, you can't, like, if they're on the other side of glass, like, that has got to be that I would imagine that made all you guys communicate in a different way.
Yeah, it did. And, it was tough because even some of my coworkers caught the disease. So, I remember back in February, there was an anesthesiologist I was working with, and she was walking down the hallway and she just kept coughing. And it was like, she was just coughing like really violently. And we didn't know anything about the pandemic at the time, but come to find out she had it. And we were working with each other. And yeah, just that whole thing of like us having to distance ourselves from each other is something. We're practicing social distancing inside of the hospital, inside of our break rooms and stuff. It's crazy, man. But yeah, we're happy that things are kind of slowing down. But yeah, it's been something, and it's been a trip also when you think about here you're trying to take care of a patient who is dying on a ventilator, and you bring that patient after the procedure back to his room, but the family can't come into the hospital because strict guidelines too. So that's something also, the fact that they don't have their family physically around them, like you said, to produce that touch, is something that has been crazy. Your heart really goes out to people right about now.
Have you guys noticed, like, in your own personal relationship over the last year, like being in a really stressful work environment, how's that affected you guys in terms of your relationship? If that's not too personal of a question, sorry.
Well, it's really interesting. And when you were talking about empathy and does that wear, especially Channing out because of working in the hospital, that's one of the reasons why I think I encouraged him to take the class with Potty, because I know he's always been a creative person, even though he's worked at the hospital. And I think one thing that helps any of us to like be able to not get burnt out, being empathetic, is being able to build ourselves back up. And so having that outlet, I think really helps him. That, I think that's my personal opinion. And I think that this past year, I think it's been tough on everybody as far as like just more pressure. But we've really always tried hard to be really open as far as our communication goes, and really supportive of what each other are doing, so that we can make sure that we're taking care of each other, and that we're also taking care of ourselves. Like, I try to make sure he's taking care of himself, and he likewise with me. So I think that helps.
Yeah, she's a trooper, man.
Well, I think sometimes our loved ones can see when we're reaching that stress point earlier than we can. I know my wife does. She can often see. Well, I wanted to switch back and go and talk about the work a little bit more. Leah, with your paintings, I noticed that there is a level, it's almost like we should say you do a lot of portraiture or images of human beings, and there will be patterns that are painted either on top of the person or behind them. It's almost like you're always working on different layers. And it reminds me in some ways of Photoshop, but it's painted, but it reminds me of that building of layers. So can you talk about how you got onto this style of painting in that way?
It's funny, Channing, he would always kind of joke with me, especially when I first started painting some years ago, is that I would paint, and then I don't know, that's something that I keep. I think it has to do with perfectionism a little bit, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I would paint over and over and over until it was right. And but at the same time, I think one of the things that about the portraits that I make, what's important to me with a lot of the portraits that I've been doing lately, is that it's more of a representation of who we are. It can be a mental state, it can be an emotional state, or a particular moment for an individual. It's not necessarily about catching the likeness of the person in their face. And so I think it's just because I think as humans, we have a lot of layers and we are very complicated. And I feel that that I think that's just somehow kind of ended up my style and my work, where I'm pushing a lot of stuff or a lot of things on top of each other that maybe they don't seem like they should work together, and I'm trying to create something new. And I think that's kind of what it represents, just us, our complicated humanity.
Yeah. Would you say that because she's also a graphic designer and, you know, using Photoshop, they use different layers. Would you say that has something to do with the work as well?
So yeah, recently, sometimes in the process, I'll go back and forth between like my iPad and so I'll draw something with paint or with pencil or whatever, and then I'll take a picture of it and maybe I'll try out. So now I can try out a bunch of different things instead of like spending 2 months on one painting trying to paint it over and get it right. I'll use my equipment to try out a few different things, and that also kind of helps me build up on those layers to get things the way I want it to before I can go back to the canvas.
There's a bit of surrealism in the work. Like there are parts that kind of work within the rational world we all live in, like gravity. And then there'll be other parts where like there's this one where this woman's hair, it almost looks like they're underwater, like the hair is going up as opposed to laying down. And then when I was looking at that, then I started to look behind and to the side, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's almost like you're painting the thought the person is having at the time they're having it or something. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but how do you describe it, of this idea of like parallel worlds or like the mental world and the physical world?
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it too. At first, I kind of would describe some of the portraits as people in like a parallel world. And I like the word parallel instead of, like another planet, because I feel like I want it to be something that we can identify with. These people are like us. They're reflective of us. And one of the things I like to do is just make sure that I want anybody to be able to see it and feel reflected as far as maybe they're emotionally, or I don't know, just feel like they can connect to the character and not be distracted by maybe some of the constraints that we have, we put on each other day to day in our society. But, and I like also the kind of bringing in certain things that are opposite or maybe oxymorons. So like you said, you're on land, but maybe the way the atmosphere is reacting to the person in the portrait, it's like they're in water. So I kind of like to have that communicate that it's kind of like a dream.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that it is dreamlike. Like I feel like a lot of the feeling, the paintings have a feeling of being like you've either just woken up and that's what you remember about the person, like that state where you're kind of half asleep, half awake. Like it has that feeling. But I wanted to bring into the conversation your guys' podcast, because that's one of the ways that I got to know you. Can you talk about first, how did the podcast start? And then how did you decide what to make a podcast about?
Some of that's your fault, man. And I told you that already. Listening to your podcast and, the way that you designed your questions, everything was really cool. And it's something that has been kind of like hitting in the back of our brain, like, hey, maybe we could start a podcast. And we were talking about it for years, like maybe we could do this. And I never actually thought that it would actually go down and I could interview some of these people. But yeah, it's happened. And I think by listening to like podcasts like yours, Paul Blaze, we had an opportunity to have both of you guys on the show. And just seeing the openness of it all, man, you can really open up a conversation, and you can find out a lot of stuff by just listening to podcasts. Sometimes, seeing how people get into a specific a group of work, you can learn a lot. Yeah.
Honestly, I have a part B to that. I think really it was Channing who wanted to do the podcast, and he was like, he kind of really helped. He motivated me to kind of like work along with him to do that. And I think one of the things is because of his medical background and because of my background and the experience I had with my father, and that's been like a thing that's kind of like a thing that kind of gnaws on me, is sometimes just in general, we take for granted our ability to create, or we take for granted some of the people that do a lot of the work that we enjoy, that make our life better. So I really wanted to, as we were talking, we wanted to talk about art and their brain and how it benefits us, and talk to many of the people who are behind, even like yourself, the thought process. Like, I think people really enjoy hearing the behind the scenes on what it takes, or kind of like the thought process of what it takes for people to create, one. And then two, even when we talk to a lot of people who collect art too, who have no interest in being artists themselves, but they like to surround themselves with pieces. And it's so important to them that they spend a lot of money, and they even make sacrifices. We have one guy who's a collector in Frankfurt, Germany. And he talks about how he doesn't have to have a car, and how he makes certain sacrifices so that he takes that money that he saved to buy the works that he wants. And he owns like over 900 works of art. And so the thing is that, it's important to these people, and talking to them, I think, because they understand how it affects them in their lives. Sometimes it's hard for us to put into words why we like something, or and even people who think they don't like art, but then love Star Wars, or love, lots of different things. And maybe they're not thinking of that as art, but those people, those creators behind those things that they love, still go through those similar thought processes. And when they see something that's Star Wars that may not be in a gallery or whatever, they're still having the same sort of feelings. And so just kind of highlighting those things was really interesting to me. And I haven't had those types of conversations like we've been able to have once we started our podcast.
Yeah. And, I think in the art world, sometimes, we use that term art world, right? But there's a lot of fluff and, a lot of talk about, things that really don't matter, sometimes, or sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, I don't have a creative bone in my body. You hear people say stuff like that, but you don't have to have a creative bone to draw or sketch or create something with your hands. I think we both feel like if you can appreciate a piece of artwork, and if it has an effect on you and you acquire that artwork, well, that's a whole thing in itself, So yeah, in the podcast, we've been able to, like Leah said with Tyrone, interview like a number of different collectors, and we just get into the whole mindset of, well, what is it like for you to have these images in your home, and how does it make you feel to wake up and see these vessels or these paintings in your home,
And I think the things that make you guys as individuals interesting, you have managed to put those into the podcast. So I like that you talk about creativity, you talk about science, you talk about technology, and also just like, what is it like to be a human? Like, why do you think something's beautiful? Like those types of questions, that is an interesting sort of stew of topics that you guys have really brought into the show. The show is Vessel Art as a Doorway. So can you talk about how that name provides a foundation for the show, as well as being the name of the show?
That's cool, man. And thank you.
Thank you.
For that. Yeah, when it comes to a vessel, and The hospital procedures that I do with the doctors, we have to get access to a particular vessel. Maybe it's an artery or a vein. And normally that's right in the leg, in the groin area. And basically, when you get access to that vessel, you use a series of wires or catheters, and you can go anywhere in the body. I mean, from the head all the way down to the foot, because there's like a passageway or vessels all throughout the body. And yeah, so it was a kind of like a play on that. But also, since we're both ceramists, we create ceramic vessels. And sometimes, you can have a vessel that can lead to a conversation like this. Our audio, these microphones, this technology that we're using is a vessel in itself. So vessel art is a doorway. Yeah, that was kind of like how we kind of ran our heads with this podcast.
And then also the fact that the idea about it being a doorway is to hopefully like open up new ways of thinking or new ways of looking at things in your life that maybe we haven't noticed before. Like we had like one musician on Bender, and he started describing like what he does music for movies, like soundtracks and things like that. I think is he a composer and a mixer?
Yeah.
And yeah, audio engineer. And so it was really interesting hearing even from his viewpoint. Like a lot of times when we're watching a movie and our feelings are getting involved in the story, like that, just hearing his part of it, like we appreciate good music, but sometimes we take it for granted, but then when it's not there, we really notice it. So it was just interesting even hearing from his standpoint, like how what he does enhances like a story and why it does that, and what he thinks about when he's mixing those tracks together. So that's just like one example. We can go on and on, but it just to kind of open up just a door into an understanding or seeing things different, or noticing and appreciating little things in our life that maybe we've taken for granted.
And I really appreciate that. What Leah's saying is, it's not just a particular style of art, when it comes to, things that we like to talk about on the podcast, not just like paintings or potters, ceramists. You may hear a song like, I was talking to Bender about it. It was like, you would hear a song from like Earth, Wind and Fire or Smokey Robinson, and instantly like you'd be in the back seat, 6 years old, in your mom's car, and your mom's singing along, so it's a certain vibe, when it comes to art, what it can actually stimulate in the brain. And, we think that's something that a lot of people take for granted. They talk about it like it's some, unrealistic thing, but art has a tremendous impact on us on a daily basis.
And my secret goal for the podcast is, we're trying to, I'm trying to learn myself and always do better, but I'm really hoping that other people continue to listen to this and can like harness that power and even do more with it. I feel like it's something that I think once people really, it's kind of like if you learn, you have a knife and you learn how to cut properly, then it becomes more powerful tool than when you don't know what you're doing with it. And I think that by saying, first of all, this is why you love this. For instance, we were just talking about the movie. This is why you love this movie. This is one of the people, and this is what they're doing behind the scenes. Now that you understand that, can you go out and even harness that power in, I don't know, like we talked about memory. Can we harness it and, I don't know, somehow with teaching kids and so that they can remember better? Can we, I don't know. I have no idea, but I feel like that's my secret hope, that somebody harnesses it and really, really, like me included, all of us harness it and make it, I don't know, make more powerful work, do more good and for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also think that you're counteracting that idea that you mentioned earlier when people say, I'm not creative, like someone taught them they were not creative. And when you listen to your guys' podcast and you hear people being creative in music, creative in medicine, like how art can affect medical outcomes, like you guys cover a lot of different topics. And I hope also that people listen to your show and other podcasts in general and just think like, no, creativity is an inherent human thing. Like it's almost like our human birthright to be creative. So I think all that stuff is really important. And when you hear other people talk about it, it validates, it's like given that sense of like, yeah, I can relate to what that person's saying. Even if they're a collector in Germany, they might not have anything else in common. When you start talking about creativity, you can make a connection there.
That's true. And it's funny that you mentioned that too, because what I've found is like even certain people who are collectors, like, and as you said, they don't feel necessarily that they are creative. Some collectors, when they actually start buying art and when ceramics, whatever, and they put things in their house, they feel when they talk about it, they begin to talk about it like they don't necessarily like they talk about the artist, but at that point, this collection becomes like an extension of them and makes them think of different things. So, and then you have some people that collect art and they're building a story. Sometimes the story is about themselves. Sometimes it's about the family. Sometimes they feel like they are entrusted with these relics of, time of right now so that they can take care of it for generations in the future. So I agree with you. It's like the idea of creativity is not just, with paint, with ceramics or, with those things. Sometimes it can be in practice and including collecting.
Yeah, I live in a neighborhood where I see a lot of people out gardening, like people are just out mowing their grass, planting their flowers. And when I was walking my dog, I was thinking like, I wonder if those people realize how specific they're making their yard, because you can kind of see from one yard to the next, like, oh, they have really different ideas about color with plants. But I don't know if they always think like I'm a gardener that's an artist, So I think it's interesting how creativity or food, like we often go to restaurants that have aesthetics that we like, whether that is the food aesthetic, like on the plate, or that might be the environment. So we're making aesthetic choices all the time, regardless of how we feel about that. I wanted to change topics a little bit and talk about the digital world and the stuff you guys have done with both digital currencies, but also NFTs. So can you talk about how you guys got interested in sort of the digital currency world first, and then how that transferred into art?
Yeah, when it comes to digital currencies, I really appreciate how you use that. You didn't say cryptocurrency, you said a digital asset, because that's exactly what they are. The whole concept when it comes to cryptography is not what cryptocurrency is really about. We think about back in 2008 Silk Roads, things were used maliciously for pornography and sex trafficking and things like that, the same way that the internet was used. But later on, what we started figuring out is the government turned their eyes to the internet and was like, hey, we're about to regulate this stuff. And the same thing started to actually happen with digital assets or digital currency. Because when Bitcoin was first created, the government was like, what is this stuff, right? Now they can actually track where the currency is being used. So I think when I came across the whole Bitcoin concept, my brother, he caught me up one day and he was like, hey man, you got to check out this Bitcoin thing. And I was like, oh, that's not going to be anything, right? And then it pulls up today and we're looking at what, $50,000-$60,000 per Bitcoin. But later on, there were a couple of people in the medical field. I found that they were buying it and investing in it. But nobody, it was always like a secret sauce to it. Nobody would want to tell you how to sign up with accounts and things like that until a buddy of mine that I was working with back in 2018, 2019, he told me about a technology that was a digital asset that would actually help the world. Now, when I heard that, I was like, hey, man, put me on. Like, where do I buy this stuff? And he was like, look, you can buy it for 10 cents a piece. And I was like, okay. And I bought it at 10 cents. I bought a ton of it. And obviously the asset goes up in price, and that's nice because when you buy a bulk of assets like that and they go up in price, you're like, oh, okay, this is good. But then later on, 2019, 2020, we're starting to hear about this stuff called NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, which basically, when you get into this, a lot of people, they just know Bitcoin and Ethereum, but they don't know that there's a ton of other digital assets that can be used or wrapped into artwork that don't require proof of work, which is basically it's a burning of fuel, that's really damaging to the environment. But there's other digital assets that don't use harmful things to the environment. So I hope I'm not really speaking too long on that. But yeah.
All digital things are created with computers that take resources that are creating some bad things. So before we get any farther into it, can you explain like how one digital asset might be better for the environment than another digital asset?
There's a lot of kind of misinformation going around about it. A lot of what they're talking about has to do really with the amount of electricity that it uses, because of all these machines using electricity, and specifically where they get the electricity is from, really. So majority of us don't really know like where we know we pay our electric bill, but we don't know if our electric company uses coal or if they use solar or what they use. And some of the places are in other countries, and maybe some of those countries, they don't have the same type of regulations for pollution as we do here. And, there's a lot of different things going on with that. But if anybody wants to find out good information, I think it's Cambridge. I'm not going to say it right. Institute. Yeah, the Cambridge Institute. There's a Cambridge Institute and they've done a research on the more accurate numbers on the energy that Bitcoin uses versus other things. But long story short, this technology was the first one. It's like the Model T Ford, but now you have Tesla, which is, solar. And so I feel like the technology is moving really fast. So even though that Bitcoin started the way it did, there's already technologies that have fixed a lot of the problems. But, we're humans. We're always going to have to improve on what we're doing when it comes to technology.
Bitcoin was created almost 12 to 13 years ago, back in 2008. But since then, the creators I shouldn't say the creators, but the people who actually engineered on the Bitcoin platform, they looked at it and they studied it, and they came out with more digital assets that are not harmful for the environment, like XRP, XLM, Helium, other coins like that, even Tezos, Algorand, and things like that. So those things aren't based on like the same structure that Bitcoin and Ethereum is based on. Vitalik Buterin created Ethereum by watching the Ripple company engineer their XRP digital currency. So he actually took some of the ideas that they had, and he created a thing that could actually produce smart contracts, which we see like with NFTs and things like that.
Most artists are going to know about NFTs because there was recent articles about NFTs being sold at auction. It can't be for the first time, but it's one of the first times that you hear about digital artists making millions of dollars off of their NFTs. And for people that might not have been able to follow the conversation, I do want to say an NFT is a digital image, or we say digital asset, but it could be an image. It could be some have moving components like the art that you're making, Leah, that are NFTs, So it's an image, but it is richer than an image. How would you guys explain why a NFT is cooler visually, or could be cooler visually, than just a digital picture?
Well, to me, it's interesting. It's kind of like our conversation earlier. Every time I move from one material to another, then you realize, like, for instance, if I'm making a sculpture in real life with clay, and I have to take gravity into consideration. So now if I want to take that and I want to put it in a digital realm, I don't have those constraints anymore. And so it's really interesting. That's how it can be richer than physical work sometimes, because you have more, you're not bound by the same rules. I think right now with this medium, things are just just starting and people are just starting to explore like how to use it. Some people are even, there's even ways, and I just got on with a company called Async Art, where you can reveal certain things. So let's say someone buys an NFT, I can create it to where it reacts to a period of time. So maybe in 20 years, maybe a new picture pops up, or what if, I made it react to the weather, maybe the color can change or something like. So there's like so many capabilities with it right now. And I think everyone's just trying to like explore so that they can kind of push the boundaries with it.
Yeah, and then there's companies like Portion.io, which Leah, she's an artist with, and they actually, when you mint an asset, they give the artist 500 PRT tokens. And also Calumet is a new platform that I've been on, where basically I had an opportunity to talk to the manager and CEO, and any artist that actually mint their artwork on their platform, they actually receive a portion of the digital currency that's basically functioning on their platform. So it's a way that, more artists, they can actually no longer be, starving artists. They, now these artists can actually create something digitally and actually be paid for it. And once they sell their particular NFT, there's a royalty on there from anywhere from 10 to 25%. So if the owners of the NFT, once they acquire that work, if they sell it, well, then the artists, they make future royalties off of the NFT. So it's a real beautiful thing. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like there's not enough ceramists like yourself on this platform. I think a lot of people are just hearing FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And they're just listening to things, but they're not actually doing the homework and finding out that there are digital assets that aren't harmful for the environment, like XRP, XLM. I can name a lot of them, but those are some of my favorites. XRP to the moon, but and that's not financial advice, but
it's good to say that. But for people that are, still confused, because I think sometimes this is so new that people are thinking like, oh no, NFTs are scary, I don't want to do anything with that. I want people to go to Leah's website because they can see the relationship between her physical paintings and the digital assets that she has. Seeing your work helped me understand why an artist would go into that realm in a way that I had not understood before. To wrap up, can you guys both plug your website and then also the podcast, how people can listen to it?
So our website is clss.studio. That's class without an A.studio.
Yeah, and you can find us on Instagram. My tag is just Glaze Channing, and Leah's Smithson Art.
Well, it's good to see you guys. Thanks for doing this today.
That's awesome.
Thanks for having us.
I'd like to thank Channing and Leah for taking the time to do this interview. It was a pleasure to chat with them and hear about what's going on in their studio. If you'd like to listen to their podcast, Vessel Art is a Doorway, you can find that on all major podcast apps. Before we go, I'd like to give one more plug for today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of a GoFundMe for Kent McLaughlin. He's been struggling with some health problems and needs support as he has not been able to work in the studio. You can find that by going to gofundme.com and search for Kent McLaughlin. I'll be back next week with another interview. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.